Welcome back to the Game Collection. I am SuperDerek, and lately I've been on a bit of a Western RPG kick. So let's take a quick break from those and try out a different kind of Western. This is Wild Arms 2. Wild Arms was an excellent title for the PlayStation, and was one of the first RPGs on the system, predating even Final Fantasy VII, and as such, it has a few rough points here and there. But when MediaVision released Wild Arms 2, 3 years later in the year 2000, they had a bit more experience under their belts. Did that experience propel Wild Arms 2 above and beyond Wild Arms? Well, to be completely honest, Wild Arms 2 is really only a Western in the same sense that David Carradine was Chinese. The world of Filgaia is a pretty interesting creation that is maybe 50% medieval, 35% sci-fi post-apocalyptic, and then maybe 15% Western. If you can envision a world in which Vash the Stampede would coexist with Dart from The Legend of Dragoon, that would be Filgaia. But unfortunately, Filgaia is under attack from a terrorist organization called Odessa, while flora and fauna are disappearing as monsters take their place. It is here that our story takes place as it follows our heroes three: Ashley the gunfighter, the teenage sorceress Lilka, and Brad, a prisoner and former war hero. After a series of encounters, each hero is recruited to join the Arms, an independent task force dedicated to wiping out Odessa and restoring peace to the land. The story of Wild Arms 2 takes a lot of twists and turns as you make your way through the 50-hour game, and the three people you start off with gradually grows to a whopping 6 playable characters, each of whom have their own personal demons that they must face along the way. They range from subjects of self-confidence and finding a reason to fight for survival to what it means to be a hero. The latter of which is actually a recurring theme throughout the game. It brought up some different perspectives that I hadn't yet considered, which is pretty impressive considering the game's severe handicap, its infamous localization, which is actually one of the worst I've experienced so far. I think that the most frustrating part of the translation job, though, is the lack of consistency. Sometimes everything reads fine and you forget that only a short while ago you were left scratching your head thanks to some vague or just outright wrong instruction provided to you by one of the NPCs. When the translation bogs down, it's not always this painful though. They're usually just humorous tautologies, unless they're not, but the constant clumsy phrasing and sentences that end mid-thought are sure to bludgeon a square peg into your poor, round psyche, especially if you're the type to dwell on such things. Translation issues aside, the game didn't seem to share many connections with the original Wild Arms, and there were a few points where the plot became overly convoluted. However, the game did manage to create a rather sympathetic antagonist with whom I actually did sympathize. And that's something that not many games have been able to do to me in the past. The story left me with an overall positive impression, and I think that a retranslation would really do the game a lot of good. Wild Arms 2 plays almost exactly like its predecessor overall. It's a turn-based RPG littered with interesting puzzles featuring random encounters and a pretty standard leveling system. But the biggest gameplay difference from Wild Arms 1 and other similar RPGs is that the developers scrapped the idea of magic points in exchange for force points. When a battle begins, you start off with force points equal to your character's level. The amount of force points you have will determine which skills and spells are available for your character to use, but most of those spells and skills don't consume those force points. So if you attack a few rounds to build up your force points, you can use your highest level spells over and over without worrying about running out of magic points, and that really helps you feel powerful during the end game. However, there are some special skills that are extremely useful which do consume force points. The battle system beyond that feels pretty ordinary though. Earlier I mentioned that battles are random, but you do get a moment of warning prior to starting a battle. If you choose to decline the battle, pressing circle will dismiss the encounter, which is very helpful in mitigating the tedium at times. And there definitely is tedium. One of the worst parts of the game is having to manually find towns using a radar function. The towns won't actually show up on your world map until you've pressed the radar button within a small vicinity of the location you're looking for, which makes traveling to a new destination take far longer than it should. The main story of Wild Arms 2 lasts around 40 hours alone, but there are a series of optional bosses guarding special endgame gear that will keep you occupied for another 10 to 15 if you're interested. There's also a lot of secret locations, secret skills, and missable characters in the game that are highly rewarding should you choose to seek them out. One of the most noticeable differences from Wild Arms 1 is the decision to embrace a 3D world map and environments. In Wild Arms 1, only battles used polygons, and everything else had this timeless, polished 2D sprite-based aesthetic. However, the presentation of Wild Arms 2 is closer to Grandia, sporting a polygonal world map and environments and 2D character sprites. The battles, however, remain fully polygonal. I'm not entirely sure which aesthetic I prefer, but in Wild Arms 2, I think it was easier to lose my bearings or miss chests, doors, or other details. Composer Michiko Naruke from Wild Arms 1 returns to provide us with some more memorable homages to the classical Wild West film scores. However, the Wild West theme was toned down a bit in Wild Arms 2, and so we're now treated to a wider variety of ambient music. Some of the best standouts in the soundtrack, though, still feature that iconic, dusty Western acoustic guitar and somber whistling. As of the time of this review, complete copies of Wild Arms 2 sell for around $20, and I'd say it's about worth that. I don't think it's really the type of game that'll change your life or anything. Keep your expectations in check with this game because while there's a lot of good, there's also some bad sprinkled in throughout, most noticeably in the localization. Overall, I'd say it's just an average game, but if you've got a special spot in your heart for the Wild West, then it's easy to recommend that you add this game to your game collection.
Ever want to know why I feel the way I do? Check out my playthrough by following the annotation in the lower right. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a patron for access to cut and behind-the-scenes content, status updates, and video commentaries just like these awesome people.